Good afternoon and welcome to another Sweet Thursday. Before we get started with our conversation, I have a few housekeeping items to attend to and future programs. We are virtual tonight and will be for the rest of this year, and then return to some in-person programming next year starting in January. And we will be alternating between live and Zoom programs, the latter being useful to attract authors and audience from outside the Bay Area. For our live events in the Don Tatson Community Hall, we will be requiring all attendees to show proof of vaccination before entering the building, and other details about how that'll work will be forthcoming. Today we're on Zoom webinar, and unlike Zoom meeting, we can't see or hear you, but you can put in your questions in the Q&A feature for our author that we will get to at the end of the conversation between our moderator and our guest, our author. All of our programs can be viewed on, on our YouTube channel shown at the bottom of this slide. Sweet Thursday is the author series hosted by the Friends of the Lafayette Library. My name is Jeff Deeden and I'm the coordinator of the program. Robin Holt will be moderating today's program with our guest author, Michelle Richmond. On November 18th, Sweet Thursday will welcome Gail Tsukiyama via Zoom to discuss her latest book, The Color of Air. After taking December off, we will return with a live program on January 27th when we host Jasmine Darznik in the Don Tatson Community Hall. You'll actually be able to meet an author and get a signed book, as a representative from Marinda Books will be there to sell and have them sign for you. In the Wonders of the World, November 10th, there will be an exploration of the history of the Mount Diablo State Park. And then on December 8th, April Angevine will return with a presentation on American abstraction. And next up of all these programs is actually part of the Lafayette Historical Society on November 7th, where a host will talk on the evolution of interurban and commuter rail travel in the Bay Area. In order to learn about all of our programming, you can sign up for the weekly ad lib emails, which come every Saturday, and these are two sample ones from a number of months ago. And those describe all of our upcoming programs at the Lafayette Library. More broadly, and you can sign up for this at llcf.org/subscribe. More broadly, you can find even more programming on the county website, which is ccclib.org. The Friends Corner Bookshop reopened a number of months ago, so please stop by to browse for inexpensive, gently used books. Book sales at the shop support a number of programs, including these listed here. The Friends Amazon store can be accessed from the main library website under the Friends tab, and higher end books are available from there. I'd like to thank the Friends, the library staff, the foundation, and my Sweet Thursday committee members for their support each month. And Michelle's book can be found at Marinda Books, who actually have helped us with some announcements by their email. We are on Instagram and Facebook. And now it's time for me to shut up in a few seconds. Our moderator today is Robin Holt. She's volunteered for many years on the board of the Friends of the Lafayette Library. She's a member of our Sweet Thursday committee, and she's an occasional moderator for Sweet Thursday. Today, she'll lead our conversation with our author, Michelle Richmond. So Robin, looks like you're already teed up on video, and so is Michelle. So if your audio is on, I will stop my screen share and you guys can get started. There we go.
All right. I'm very happy to be introducing Michelle Richmond tonight. She's a New York Times bestselling author of 8 books and story collections, most notably The Year of Fog, Golden State, and The Marriage Pact. She usually writes psychological thrillers set in the Bay Area, but not all are in the Bay Area. She's actually from Alabama, went to undergraduate school there, and then graduate school with a master's in fine arts in Florida. She also teaches an online master class for aspiring writers. But the really most important thing about Michelle for our group is she's one of the very few repeat authors we've had. She was one of our first authors when our new library opened 10 years ago. So that's quite a distinction, Michelle, and we're happy to have you back.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm so happy to be here, and I love the library. And even though I can't be there in person, it's good to see you and to know that the library patrons are here.
Good. Now, this book is a riveting read, I'd have to say. But what I love about it is it's both a thriller, but a book with great heart. And so we're going to talk about The Wonder Test. And maybe I'll send it back to you, Michelle, and just say, how did you come up with an idea for this book? Because it's really unique and wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. So The Wonder Test takes place in a small Northern California town in Silicon Valley, or near Silicon Valley, called Greenfield, which is a fictional town. Although there are some, Burlingame is actually mentioned frequently, and there are some real spots from Burlingame in the novel, like the Royal Donut Shop, where I just was a few hours ago, and where I frequently am. And so it's set in a small town in Silicon Valley, where the sophomore students all take an annual exam called the Wonder Test. And the protagonist is Lena Connerly, an FBI agent who is on a brief self-imposed leave. She works in the FBI in New York City and has for 16 years. But she grew up in, it says, down the hill from this fancy town. And her father, after she had left home, bought this big house and fixed it up in this very affluent town. So 2 things have happened to her very recently. Her father has died and left her, and she's an only child, and has left her with this big home that she needs to come and clean out and take care of. But also, and that happened a few months before the start of the novel, but also her husband has recently died in a sudden accident, a car accident. And so she is trying to get her life back together, and she has a 15-year-old son, Rory. So she comes with her son to this small town. And with that out of the way, to answer your question, the impetus for the book came from 2 things. One was just thinking about testing culture in general, and what we put kids through in terms of tests, and also just sort of over the years with a child in public school in Northern California, looking at the homework and worksheets and sort of these absurdist questions that aren't ever intended to be absurd, but sometimes they just boggle the mind, and you don't really know where they're going. And so that was part of the inspiration. And the other inspiration is I wanted to write an FBI character, which I've never done before. But actually, and we can get to this in a later question, I'm sure, has been a big part of my life. And so So it was those two things coming together. And I was also interested in writing about motherhood and being a mom to a teenager in sort of this pressure cooker that we're all living in.
Good. Well, let's talk about the FBI aspect, because I've always been curious about FBI people, and I've known some through the years, but your book tells so much about their training. And Lena is a counterintelligence profiler. You can talk more about it, but I learned so much from your book about the training in Quantico and the things they go through, and even how she had to learn to shoot with both hands, because often, you know, if you're right-handed, you still, maybe your right hand is busy doing something else and you need to be a good shot with your left hand. That's just a tiny aspect. And I love about the payments she had to witness being made to other sources. So maybe you can tell where you learned so much, and was that all true, or did you make up some of the FBI facts?
So I will tell you a very short story to explain where it all came from, which is that when I was in my mid-20s and I had gone to a Master's of Fine Arts program in creative writing, and my first day there, I saw this boy who I found very attractive, and I went and introduced myself in the hallway after class. And he was from San Francisco, where I had always wanted to live. And about halfway through the year, the FBI called him, and because he had applied to the FBI sort of on a lark, on a dare from friends, before he ever went to our MFA program in creative writing. But right after he applied, they had had a hiring freeze. So he's in the writing program first year, and the FBI calls him and says, our hiring freeze is over. Will you come talk to us? So that was in 1995. I married that boy. We're still together. He thought he would do the FBI for a couple of years and see what it's like, but he's still, so all these years later, he is still with the FBI. So really, I did no research for this book. Or no research on that aspect of it. It's just, I've lived my entire adult life as an FBI spouse. And I thought at this point in my life, finally at liberty to write about it. So it's all fiction, but I think sort of the little pieces about the FBI life are very accurate. But of course, I made everything up because she's an agent who works foreign counterintelligence, and which a lot of people think the FBI doesn't do that, but they actually do, and it started under Louis Freeh. So she works counterintelligence. So in the background of this sort of small town mystery that she's dragged into solving, in the background are a couple of her espionage cases. And so those, of course, are completely fictional. I just made them up, and I don't really know anything about that world. What I know about is sort of the day-to-day life of an FBI agent. And then the little details about Quantico, of course, I asked my husband. And I do remember we had not been together for very long when I transferred to a different MFA program at the end of that year. And my husband left, or my boyfriend left, and went to Quantico. And I do remember going right after he had graduated from Quantico and meeting him in Alexandria, Virginia, and then us ending up and going to his Quantico graduation and seeing Quantico in the town where they do all their practice, like where they learn all these sorts of tactical things. And so like that was in the back of my mind. But so I asked him if I had gotten certain things right, obviously, but yeah, that's where all that stuff came from. Long answer to a short question.
I had no idea that you had that upfront and personal view of FBI. That is so fun to know. The other part of Lena is her role as a mother and as now a single parent. And I loved all that you wrote about her husband who had died and the slack he had picked up raising their child. And now I can see you probably played the role that the husband did in this book, because in this book, Lena is so involved in her career and she has to be away a lot. And that husband was very important. Now she's a widow with a teenager. And this book has a lot, and the son is very important in the story. So there's a lot about a mother wondering how much and how far she can go with things. Do you want to talk a little about that?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, that's an astute observation that her husband, who had a private sector job, was the one, as they were raising Rory, who did sort of the PTA stuff, and even the play dates and all that stuff. And she was kind of married to her job, and she always felt, she loved her family very much, but she always felt there were these big things happening that she absolutely had to take care of. And so her husband, Fred, ended up doing a lot of the more day-to-day parenting and just being there, physically present more than she was. And so when she loses her, in a way that traditionally families often work in the opposite, with the husband working more hours and the mom taking care of more of those day-to-day child rearing things, even while she's working, just doing sort of that day-to-day. So I wanted to reverse it in this book. And so when she loses her husband, she's just cast into the total unknown, that she has her own grief. There's her son's grief at not only losing his father, but losing the parent who is always there. And meanwhile, in the sort of throes of that grief, she makes a mistake at work, which the organization does not think of as a mistake, but which she thinks of as a mistake, because she feels like she should have done something differently. And it turns out being costly to someone she cares about at work. So she feels like she has to put all that aside and just concentrate on Rory, but she doesn't know how to do it. And so she's constantly wondering, am I doing this right? And she even at one point says, I'm pretty sure I'm doing everything wrong, but it's working for us right now. Like, she doesn't do the dinner the way she, she thinks a mom is supposed to have this like well-planned dinner every night. Instead, they're just sort of eating tacos at the table, or she feels like she's not getting things right, but she's really connecting or trying to connect with her son, who in some ways is being protective of her because he knows how much grief she's dealing with. So I really was interested, and I think the timing of the book is interesting because I wrote the book before, it was finished, a draft was finished in 2018, and during the pandemic, I had finished most of the revising, but I think we've all seen what adolescents are capable of during the pandemic, because this is a generation who went through something that none of us alive have gone through. Yeah. And it's kind of impressive to me the way adolescents have handled this unprecedented period of isolation. And so I wanted to present a teenager who is a complex person and a smart person, and who's not just mouthing off all the time, or it's like, because I think our kids have had to, in some ways they grow up much slower than we did, but in other ways they've had to meet challenges that we didn't at that age. So I wanted to sort of have a nuanced look at a teenager and the parent-teen relationship.
Well, I love the whole personal aspect and the mother-son relationship and the things she's dealing with. Now, very early on, Lena asks her son about school, and he tells her, well, we're not really having classes. We're just having seminars and coaching for the wonder test. And, you know, it's so bizarre to her that the school would only focus, and then it turns out not just the school, the whole town only focuses on doing superbly, having every student do wonderfully on the wonder test. So tell us a little about the wonder test and maybe some of the questions.
Okay. Yeah. So the test itself was absolutely the most fun part of the book. I mean, that was sort of in the very beginning that existed, you know, because when you start a book, there are pieces of it that you have formed in your mind, and there are pieces of it that are a complete unknown. And I never know where a book is going, but I always have to have a couple of things that I start with. So I started with the idea of a town obsessed with a standardized test and the idea of the FBI agent, and bringing these two together. So, but writing thinking about the test was so much fun. So what I ended up doing was having a test question at the beginning of each chapter. And since the book came out, I've gotten emails and Facebook messages, social media messages from people asking about the questions and saying, well, I Googled and I couldn't figure out how to solve this question. And so the secret is there is no secret. The questions, none of them have an actual answer. I mean, some of them, I suppose you could, some of them sort of are opinion oriented, and I guess you could come up with an answer, but if you don't know the answer, that's good, because there are no real answers. So yeah, I wanted to just take this idea of standardized testing, which anyone whose child has gone through public school, or who knows a child has gone through public schools, knows that unfortunately the teachers, and my sister-in-law is a teacher in San Francisco Unified School District. And you have these amazingly talented teachers who do unfortunately have to spend a lot of the time preparing their students for a standardized test. And these tests have become the marker of excellence for public schools, so that, you know, towns, zip codes, areas can say, look at our schools. And it's very much a part of sort of the town's identity, is the school's excellence based on its test score. So I just wanted to take that idea and push it, you know, with psychological fiction, you're always just taking something that's pretty normal and then pushing until it's, you know, way past normal, but still in some way plausible, like you can imagine it actually happening. So I will read I'll read a few of the test questions, and just to give the viewers a feel for that little piece of the book. Assuming the universe is always expanding, at what point does it become less likely that you will find your lost keys by continuing to look for them? Diagram and discuss. There are a lot of questions that ask you to diagram something. Orange, yellow, singing, and velvet. Identify the 4 countries in which these revolutions took place and explain the origin and meaning of the names. Create a logical name for your country's own next revolution, incorporating current socio-political trends. Or compare and contrast, comparison and contrast. That's a simple one. David Bowie once said, it's not who does something first that matters, but rather who does it second. Explain why he was right using historical examples from the hard sciences. And I'll read one more. When time travel is finally invented, who will be in the most danger? Provide a plausible timeline and supporting scientific data. So you can see how these were just fun to write, and they're meant to be lighthearted, and I want the readers to have fun with them. Although part of the process of revising the book was going back and moving questions around, or getting rid of some and coming up with new ones that didn't fit. Most of them are not specifically related to a chapter or to the subject of a chapter, although some are. But there are some chapters where the tone of the question was too light for what was happening in the chapter. So I would have to revise and go a little bit darker with the question, or have something that kind of would allude to the theme of the chapter. So that was really fun to do.
So the questions I mean, I found myself in the beginning trying to answer the questions, and then I thought, whoa, where are we going? And then some, you just think, oh my goodness. I mean, that I just can't believe you thought up so many clever questions. And you're right, there was one about chocolate chip cookies, a question or something, and then that was in the chapter. So that was sort of
That's true, yeah.
that was sort of an extra fun thing to say, oh, look, the question does have something to do with the chapter. But that whole question part and the wonder test itself and how the school prepares the kids for the wonder test is amazing. But now what makes it a thriller? We haven't touched on that because early on, Lena hears that some of these students in this school a few have disappeared through the years, a set of twins one year, and then a boy the year before, and then a girl. And being the FBI agent, she can't, nobody's asked her to solve or look into that, but she just can't resist getting involved. And this is where the thriller aspect comes in. And somebody had told me who'd read the book ahead of me said, oh, block out a lot of time for that last 100 pages because you're not going to want to do anything but read. And that was exactly what happened. I could not, I had to read that whole 100 pages in one swoop. It is absolutely, as I said, riveting. We don't want to tell too much about it, but one of the fun things about this aspect is she gets trying to track down why were these kids disappearing and then reappearing. Takes you all over geographically, all over the Bay Area. And I thought that was extra fun, especially if you're a Bay Area person, but you went from Silicon Valley and out to the coast and into the city and then up to the Russian River and Guerneville. So tell us a little bit about the thriller part and the mystery part without giving it away.
Okay. Yeah, so it's like you said, she sort of gets drawn into this, this is not a case that the FBI is investigating. And in fact, the police in Greenfield, this fictional town, are sort of pretending like it's not a case. But she does meet a young police officer who's been assigned to sort of tie everything up and kind of, be done with it. And she's like, you're just out of the police academy. Don't you think it's a little weird? They're assigning a missing kid to someone who just graduated from the police academy. And he says, yeah, I guess it's because the kid is okay and returned. But she says, well, bring over the files. I'll take a look at these files and see, just kind of, and she just gets drawn into it because she starts reading these files about the child who most recently went missing, and she starts reading the interviews and she gets intrigued. And the young police officer says, maybe you could take a look at this. And then her son on the side is also saying, Mom, like if a kid goes missing, you have to look into it. What if I went missing? Like, don't you, when you want someone to look into it? And her son also is aware that not working has changed her and has not been good for her. And her son wants her to get back to work, to being the person that he knew before the loss of his father just devastated their family. So, I think with writing sort of the mystery and thriller aspect of the book, what I was most interested in was not keeping everything a secret, but trying to create suspense through motive. Why was this happening, and why is the town sort of kind of pretending like it's, or why is nobody making a big deal of it? So that was, you're right, it's hard to really talk about without giving too much away, but I will talk about using the Bay Area locations.
Good.
So when this book opens, Lena is talking to tech exec, I can say this because this happens in the first chapter, is talking to a tech executive who is telling the story of how she saw this gaunt, sort of traumatized bald boy walking toward her on the beach at Half Moon Bay. And so the tech executive is telling Lena this story, and I did it that way so that I could get sort of a mystery on page 1, so you know that something's coming, and then I could backtrack to talk about how Lena got to where she is and the loss of her husband and father, and sort of set the scene in this town beside Burlingame with the Royal Donut Shop. And then throughout the book, her investigation leads her to places that are just honestly kind of dear to my heart. So the Russian River appears in a book of mine that came out in 2009 called Know When You Know. And Guerneville figures in that book as well. I had never heard of the Russian River until I married my husband, and he grew up going to the Russian River and to Monterey. And so this book just sort of led me there, as did Know When You Know more than 10 years ago. So for me, it's just really fun to write about these places that I know and love. My first sort of, it wasn't my first book, it was my third book, but my first book that anyone outside my family read was called The Year of Fog. And that opens with the disappearance of a little girl on Ocean Beach. So this one felt a little bit circular in that it opens with an appearance of a child at Half Moon Bay. That wasn't intentional. It was only after I had written it that I saw sort of a sort of circular thematic thing going on with these two books across this long period of time that I couldn't have imagined when I was, in my early 30s writing that book. But yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, Robin, but I will say that writing a thriller, you're just trying to take the tension to the next level. And so in every scene, you're thinking, how can I make this worse for the protagonist? And a thriller is different than other types of fiction in that you really have to push your characters to places you would never want to go, and make your characters make sometimes bad choices, or have two choices that are so bad that it's hard to imagine ever being in a situation that awful. And so that's the fun of writing a thriller, is just turning it up, 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 up. So the reader is thinking, well, how is she going to get out of this? Or is she going to get out of this?
And I love the way in the first chapter, the creepy part was laid out of finding this boy on the beach. And then we backtrack and hear the story. And meanwhile, you're thinking, where is this going? What is it about? But you said something so many authors say, that you don't ever fully know where the story's going or how the character's developing. And not being a writer myself, that's always just boggled my mind. But how much did your story waver from what you thought, or the character change, or make poor decisions or good decisions that surprised you?
Yeah, I think that, well, I can sort of bring this back to the beginning of our conversation, because the character definitely did some things that no FBI agent I know, and of course we've had in our life many FBI friends, and she made some decisions that I can't imagine that no FBI agent I know would actually do those things, because it's a thriller. So I think probably in the beginning, I know the situation. I know the protagonist, big external, like their big challenge, like what's the big mystery or the question that has to be answered by the end of the book, that's sort of outside of them, which in this case is the child who goes missing. And then I also know what is the big personal challenge facing that protagonist. And I know that at the beginning of every book. And like I wouldn't start writing a book if those two ideas weren't already meeting in my mind. And then and I never know how it's going to end. I just think, how would this character respond in the situation? And then I throw more things at her, but it's not like I write down a plot and throw those plot pieces at her. Those things that come at her just develop as I sit down to write, or as I'm walking. I walk a lot, and I come up with ideas while I'm walking, or used to be while I was driving, but I don't really drive many places anymore, but because my son's school is very close. So I just kind of, and there always is, the first 50 pages I can write pretty quickly because I'm setting things up and setting up the character's emotional state, setting up the place, and like just starting with what this little mystery is. And then I get 50, 70, 100 pages in. Then I always have to stop and really think, okay, what happens next? What is logical but surprising? And it's just a process of doing that over many months, asking that question again and again. Okay, what's the logical next thing that you can't just see coming from a mile away? Like, it has to make sense, but also take you a little direction that you're not expecting. And so I guess I don't really know how a book comes together. Just know eventually it does, or it doesn't, because I have a lot of books that haven't come together. But anyone that's been published, eventually I've sort of figured it out and gotten the protagonist to the end.
I love hearing that process. Were there any other characters in this book that you particularly loved writing, or that you, without giving away the story, because there are some real characters here, but were some more fun than others to sort of create and write about?
No, I think Lena's dad, even though he has died before the start of the book, I think he's a presence in the book. And I think her love for him, tenderness toward him, and his sort of his nature, I enjoyed that part of it. There's a character in the book called Mr. Beach, who is a teacher at the school. And I almost just
Don't
I have
tell.
to be careful. But who was fun writing. There was a scene of a runner that was really fun to write, and a lot of people have asked me. It's a scene about it's something called the Kizar Mile, which is an annual race in San Francisco, and it happened. She tells the story as told to her by her father of this amazing race and this mysterious person the rabbit who won the race and then ran off into obscurity, and no one knows who he was. So that was really fun to write. And a funny thing happened when I was at my son's high school on the peninsula, his public school, at a sort of back to school meeting for sports, and I see a guy flying around the track with this big bushy red hair and like these old shorts, and he is like, he stepped out of the book. It was the craziest thing, because by then the book had already been out a few months, and he looked exactly like the character in the book, even though it was a completely fictional character. So that character was fun, and made more fun by the fact that then he just mysteriously appeared. There is, who else do I like? There's a villain. There are a couple of villains who I just had fun with, who were no particular person, but I had fun thinking about, why would these people do what they do? So but I would say that Rory and Lena's dad were probably, like, if I had to meet someone in real life, I would probably want to meet Rory and Lena's dad.
I loved how we learned a lot about Lena's dad, because he left little Post-it notes around his house. And so in the book, he's already died, but she finds little notes, and one's a very important note about trust this man.
Mhm.
So we learned a lot about him in a very subtle way. And I
Yeah.
thought that was very clever.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you. Robin, I forgot to mention one character who George in the book
Yeah.
is Lena's partner. And
FBI partner.
yes,
Yes.
and he comes in throughout the book because they're working on an old case together, and also he then helps Lena with this mystery that she's trying to solve. But the reason I like George is that relationship between Lena and this FBI friend and colleague, I think is like one of the most accurate pieces in the book. This sort of intellectual back and forth they have, this very genuine and deep, long-standing friendship based on trying to figure things out together for so long, and the way they help each other out and are sort of family. I like that character because I've known people like that, and I have seen what an important part of my husband's life at work that has been. So that was an interesting character to write.
And you said in there something about the trust they built from their history together, and that if someone like George asks you to help, you would, no questions asked.
Mhm.
And then same thing, he would. And I love that that's built on observations of real FBI relationships. That's good to know. Well, it's a thrilling book. And I wonder if you've had any interest to make a movie or a TV series, or is it too soon? It hasn't been out that long.
Not too soon, fingers crossed. There has not, I'm trying to figure out where we are on this one because I actually did talk. So the marriage pact, which came out in 2017, is under option. And the way an option works is a producer or production company will option it. They have it for 12 to 18 months and they re-option it if they haven't started making it yet. So I have an agent I have my longtime agent who has always worked on film options, starting with A Year of Fog. And then I also have a new film agent who specifically does film, who works with my literary agent. And so we had a meeting not too long ago to talk about the marriage pact. And he said that he was in the process of talking to people about the wonder test. So yeah, I would love it if that were option. I think the whole, the adaptation scene is really interesting right now because they're so, now with not just Netflix, but all of these other streaming platforms, they're hungry for
content.
Well, they call it, I was going to say what they call content, which it is content, but of course you don't want to ever think of your book as content, like your baby. You don't think of it as content, but they are really hungry for content and for things to adapt so that and it's adapted work is really taking up a larger share, I think, of the limited TV series market than it used to. So hopefully we'll get a bite on this one. We'll see.
Oh, well, it would be great. So we'll stay tuned. Now, I'd love for you to tell a little bit about what you're working on next.
Sure, thank you. So I promised my publisher that Lena will return. So I am working on the fiction I'm working on right now is the next Lena novel, which will involve Lena and Rory in Paris. And when I sold this book, I was living in Paris. And so that book will involve her doing her job in Paris, and Rory will be there with her. So I'm working on that. And I'm also working on, so when I was living in Paris, I wrote a lot of essays and sort of, so I'm thinking about, I have a very large chunk of over 100,000 words of essays and memoir pieces that I'm trying to weave into a memoir about the expat years in Paris, but I'm really trying to figure it out. because I've published essays before, but I've never published a book of nonfiction. So I'm kind of trying to figure out the tone and what pieces belong and what pieces don't belong. And when we got to Paris and I started writing about our experience there, was before the biggest train strikes in 40 years hit us. It was before the yellow vests hit us, although that started about a month after we arrived and was crazy and a little bit scary sometimes. And of course, it was before the pandemic. So what I was writing about really changed during the course of being there. So I'm sort of trying to figure that out, how to piece together a memoir and what should be the focus of it.
So you'd use your Paris experience for both the basis for another novel and for a memoir.
Yes.
And how long were you in Paris?
Almost 3 years.
Oh, how wonderful. And did your son go to school there?
Yes, he did. He went to the international school there. So the language was in English.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a really interesting experience for us. But it was also, I mean, because the yellow vest, not just the yellow vest, but the transit strikes happened. So my son was walking home from school and he was walking, like my husband would drive him to school, but then he would walk home. It's 2 miles, which isn't crazy, but kids these days mostly don't walk 2 miles home from, it was a little more than 2 miles, but it was through Arc de Triomphe, through that whole, I mean, so it's very crowded, weird, so I just think that whole experience was it was an unsettling time to be there, but very interesting.
Well, and provides a lot of facts and thoughts for future work.
Yeah, definitely.
So is there, the book is available, of course, everywhere, Renda Books for local people, but is there anything else you want to say about the Wonder Test before we let people ask questions, something we didn't cover?
I just hope you'll get it at Renda Books or at the Lafayette Library. And you can, there's a playlist for the Wonder Test. I do a playlist for every book and it's on my website, michellerichmond.com. If you go to my website, it says books, and then you can, click on any one of the books and it, gives you like different little pieces of information like the reading group guides or the song playlist. So yeah, but I hope people will read it and like it and then write to me about it.
and I also recommended it to my book group. I think it's a great book to discuss. And, everyone could talk about all the different characters and all the tension and excitement. So great job. I just loved it. Now, we'll ask Jeff if there are any questions from listeners, or if Jeff or Ruthie have some questions.
Well, I have one question. I love that you have so much psychology in your books. And so where does that interest come from? Did you study psychology, or have you just always been intrigued with how that works, or have you just sort of been drawn to the thriller genre?
So thank you, Ruthie. I did, I thought when I was young that I would study psychology, and I never did. So I just took a couple psychology classes in college, but if I had done something else, if I had decided to take a different path other than just sort of going straight and full into the writing thing, it would have been law or psychology, one of the two. But I think more just I'm always interested in why people do what they do. And when I'm reading fiction, like to me, anything can happen. Anything can happen and I'm satisfied as long as I know why the characters are doing what they're doing. And if that's missing, I get frustrated. And it's the same with watching a movie or a TV show. If we can't figure out why they're doing it, it's frustrating. But I'll also say, so in the book, she's in the BAP program, behavioral analysis. It's BAP stands for Behavioral Analysis Program, and it's a separate counterintelligence behavioral analysis thing within the FBI's other behavioral analysis unit. And so my husband's been doing that for 16 years. So we we don't talk about, obviously, about cases or anything, but we talk about sort of psychology at the dinner table. So I think that's part of it too. am just always curious about.
Interesting. Well, great.
Here's a question. How much of your son is in Rory?
That is a good question. My son hasn't read the book. He's 16, so he hasn't read any of my books yet. I think my son's inquisitiveness and his way of talking is in the book. There are a lot of things about Rory that differ a lot from my son. It's not, the character isn't my son, and I wouldn't write my son in a book without his permission. But there is, I think a lot of times we don't give kids credit enough for how smart they are in terms of associative thinking and putting things together. And that part of Rory, I think, is just from knowing my son. Yeah.
You and Robin discussed some of your writing process and specifically endings. Do you ever come up with 2 or 3, or conversely, do you ever submit one and your editor or publisher says, no, go back and work on this?
Always. So I always come up with 2 or 3. My publisher never sees the first ending or the second ending that I write. So I always try endings on, like shoes at the end of the book. It's not that I think I'm going to write a bunch of different endings, that I'll write an ending and think, well, that's not right. And then I'll write something else and that's not right. And so, and I'm trying to think with the wonder test, I don't remember. I mean, I worked really hard to figure out how this could possibly end. And I don't remember how many endings I wrote, but once I got it to my publisher, the ending stayed. I mean, that it didn't change in this book. With the Marriage Pact, I really wrangled a lot with it was a different publisher, with my editor at that publishing house about the ending. I mean, months and months of wrangling before. And then it was optioned, and then the movie people had a different idea for it because it was optioned before it was published. And so that one was much more trying in terms of the ending. But yeah, this one, once I figured out where the ending was going to take place, it was much simpler. And also so there's a big climax. And then after that, there's sort of this walking away where it's just, well, I can't say anything, but
it was sort of wrapping up loose ends.
Yeah,
sort of.
I always like to write after the big climax. I always want to go back down to an emotional level and drop one level deeper in terms of the emotional aspect of the story. And that's what I tried to, I don't know if I achieved it, but that's what I tried to do with this one.
Good question, Jeff. Yeah.
I have a silly one. Do you get free donuts for life now?
I wish, I was just there today. I don't think they have any idea. Well, I'm sure they don't have any idea, but I actually should take a book to Royal Donut Shop and just tell them that they feature really prominently in the book. We used to, when The Year of Fog came out, all those years ago, my little son at the time, I used to always go to Louis' Diner before I took him to his little preschool at the VA campus on California Street. And that in the owner and one of the women who I saw frequently when we went in knew, somebody told them, oh, Louis is in this book. And so we did talk about that book. No free bacon, but I did get to talk about that book with a lady I knew from Louis, which sadly is not here anymore. Which that shut down while we were in Paris, and that one hurt when San Francisco lost Louis.
Other questions? Well, it was a wonderful book, Michelle. I just recommend it to everybody. I think it's one of those ones when you just want to sit up and read, and that's always a success with me. So maybe we'll have you back again with your next book.
I
You'll
would
be a
love
triple
to. I
hit
would
with
love
us.
to. Thank you
Yeah.
for your great questions, Robin, and thank you, Ruth and Jeff, and for everybody who showed up. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad your heroine is coming back in another book because I think she's got a lot of character and we'd love to see her again.
Thank you.
So, oh, someone else has
Thank
a
you.
question. Wait, I see a question, Jeff.
Okay.
A raised hand, I think. Did you see it?
No, we don't do raise hand, so
All right,
that
I
should be disabled.
Okay, I saw Ann Eppert raised her hand.
Oh,
All right, well, if it's not a question you can see. Okay,
All
well,
right.
maybe we'll just say goodbye, Michelle, and thank you
Okay.
so much. It's always fun. I wish we were doing this in person, so
Me too, but this was great. And thank you to the friends of the library too.
good.
It's really
Keep writing and we'll have you
good.
back.
we'll see you next time.
Okay,
Thank you
take
very
care.
much.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.